Hello, everyone, and welcome to Johnny's Ambassadors Expert Webinar Series for Parents. I'm Laura Stack, your host today and the founder and CEO of Johnny's Ambassadors, where we educate parents and teens about the dangers of today's high THC marijuana on today's adolescent brain formation, mental illness, and suicide. We have another expert guest with us today, whom I will introduce in just a moment after I go over a few logistics. This session is being recorded. Please share it with your friends and family. Catherine has provided a handout, which is a thumbnail PDF of her slides that is in the handout section that you can download and take notes, or if you're watching this as a recording, it is on the page where you are watching this video. Catherine is going to present for 45 minutes, and then she is going to take 15 minutes of your questions. So there is a question box in your control panel, which we would encourage you to use as you think of questions. Please type them out, and at the end, I will take her slides down and interview her for 15 minutes reading your questions. So please make sure to get yours in. All right, with that, I am excited to introduce Catherine Antley, MD, who graduated from the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, completed her residency in anatomic and clinical pathology at Duke University Medical Center, and fellowship in dermatopathology at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. She is board certified in anatomic and clinical pathology and in dermatopathology, and is a fellow of the American Society of Dermatopathology. For 20 years, she has served as laboratory director of Vermont Dermatopathology, a woman-owned independent lab serving Vermont, New York, and New Hampshire. Catherine, thank you so much for being one of Johnny's ambassadors.
Thank you, Laura, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm so pleased to be with you. It's an honor to be one of Johnny's ambassadors.
Oh, we lost your slides, Catherine. If you could just click on the PowerPoint icon in your system tray again. There we go. And click on your slide one time. And there we go.
Okay. Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm so pleased to be with you. It's an honor to be one of Johnny's ambassadors. The Icelandic prevention model, Planet Youth, offers a powerful example of how an out-of-control epidemic of addiction can be turned around. Its story is important for every parent who's worried that their child might get mixed up in substance misuse, or for those families who've suffered that painful experience, or for communities struggling with the costs of coping with increased drug misuse. The Icelandic prevention model decreases demand for drugs through community building, through cultural change around preventing drug use, and it creates a societal shift in our ideas about what's needed to give kids the best chance to grow up drug-free. It demonstrates that we can, in fact, affect change and create communities which are conducive to kids not wanting to use drugs. It gives optimism in an area in the United States which is not often hopeful, because year after year we hear tragic news about more drug overdoses and increased, unfortunately, cannabis use disorder. Iceland teaches that prevention is possible, but it also lets parents know that they cannot do it alone. Community effort is required, and prerequisites include a sense of alarm or urgency about the current situation, and also a sustained commitment to engage in a scientifically based process involving increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors specific for your child in your community and in your town. Yep, now. And in talking about a sense of alarm, I'm just going to go, this is a little bit of a diversion, but I think it makes sense. In the United States today, we have high substance use, and we have an opiate epidemic. For example, in Vermont, our use rates in general for 12 and over per past month use are highest in the entire nation. And they started increasing in 2013 and have continued since then from 11 to 19%. And we were warned that the ER rates and hospitalization rates would increase. And indeed, now in the spring, we've had 5 articles in the newspapers talking about kids in crisis in mental health, waiting in emergency rooms. And none of those articles, though, are mentioning that cannabis has something to do with that crisis. We also, going along with that, Vermont is #1 in the nation for illicit drug use. So those go together. The health department also released data showing us that the marijuana use and the illicit drug use track right together. We do know that in the country and in Colorado, in places that have legalized commercialized marijuana, our opiate drug use has not decreased, even though that was one of the promises of commercializing marijuana. And just last year in 2020, Vermont saw more people die from substance overdose than from COVID. And Vermont's death rate increased in 2020. Now, in Iceland, their death rate did not increase. So both Vermont and Iceland were pretty vigilant from a public health standpoint. And people were encouraged to get vaccinated, to mask, and to social distance. And in Vermont, it worked. We have the lowest morbidity and mortality in the entire United States from COVID. But we lost so many people to drug overdose that we had more deaths than before. So it just goes to show that the many years of investment that Iceland has put in have really paid dividends. And it's not just mental health or various other things. We do know, for example, that Iceland has very high depression rates, but for whatever reason, they didn't have substance overdose rates that increased like Vermont did. Industry promotes the myth that serves to decrease our sense of alarm, that there's nothing wrong with substance misuse. I don't know how many times I've heard legislators tell me that 10% of the population will develop a use disorder no matter what our public policy is, or the things that we should do, we can't do, like change someone's genetics or propensity for mental illness. But Iceland's sustained decreasing substance use rates have proven these myths false. So here's Iceland's graphs of their youth substance uses over the last 20 years. And you can see that they didn't change their genetics, but they had a remarkable decrease in substance misuse in kids for tobacco, alcohol, and cannabis. And so the green line is alcohol. And in 1990, they were having 42% of their youth were getting drunk at least once a month and sometimes more. 23% were using cannabis, 17% were using cannabis, and 23% were smoking tobacco. 17%, that's an ever cannabis use. And that was fuel for alarm in Iceland, and those numbers were so concerning that they started to investigate, and they started the process of implementing what we now know as youth in Iceland. So how does the model work? The idea is to prevent childhood use. If you prevent childhood use, you can prevent the development of substance misuse. That youth are predictably and reliably products of their environment, so it takes the pressure off the individual child and their willpower or to be a hero. Scientific method, they use surveys to identify what are the problems in a small community, a school, a town. What are the risk factors in your community, in your school, and what are the protective factors? And then it's important to have a sustained collaborative effort by adults to improve the situation every year, increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors.
Just click on your slide one time there, Catherine.
So why do we try to So why do we focus on the child in prevention? What we know is that 90% of people with a substance problem began smoking, drinking, or using drugs before the age of 18. We also know that if we can prevent first drink, first drug, first smoke for as long as possible, then we reduce the number of people who eventually will have a substance misuse problem. And we know that those folks who begin to use later in life will not, they're less likely to develop a problem, and if they do, they're more likely to be able to step away from it from choice or use moderately. We also know that the substance use is not siloed. So heroin use is part of a larger substance use problem. And for example, if someone uses marijuana, if they're addicted to marijuana, they're 3 times as likely to be addicted to heroin. And why is this? Well, we know from a number of articles, but this is a good one by Nora Volkoff, the developing brain is easily addicted. And some of the ideas, some of the thoughts about why that's true has to do with the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's decision-making and moderates social behavior, and it's not developed until about 21 for women and 25 or later for men. And drugs and alcohol during the developmental stage, especially during adolescence, can disrupt the prefrontal cortex and set the brain up for addiction later on in life. We know that children are products of their environment and community, and they rely on parents and community norms to, as Dr. Smith said, scaffold them while their brains are under construction until they're fully developed in their 20s. Unfortunately, industry also knows that children are more easily addicted, and they also know that more concentrated products addict more quickly. And so we have cartoons, Santa Claus cartoons, selling marijuana, obviously targeted toward children. And this from Diane Carlson, a photograph of a young child holding THC gummy bears, which are obviously attractive to very young children. So this group of people knows this type of information very well, but it's important to remember that 80% of the product of alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana, those expenditures are 80% of the product is consumed by 20% of the consumers. And for THC, I think it's even higher than that. And so the for-profit companies, of course, they're expected to focus on targeting these children who are vulnerable. So what happens in Iceland? In Iceland, we had a coordination between scientists who knew about the prefrontal cortex, who knew about first drink, first smoke, who knew how vulnerable the children were, who communicated that information to the policymakers, leaders of state, who helped guide the ship in a way that it could catch the most wind. So it integrates the research, the policy, and the practitioners in order to have the Icelandic youth program work the best. So this cartoon is actually from Denmark, but it's a good one. So how did things happen in Iceland? The story is that this is a picture of Reykjavik at 3 a.m. And of course it's light, and this is 1996 or 8, and it's full of intoxicated adolescents. So they were alarmed, and that sense of alarm fueled them to try to find a solution. And the first thing they did, which was intuitive, was to say, let's just teach them to say no, or let's scare them, let's show them the cancers and whatnot. But they're scientists, and they continued to measure what was happening with the kids. And unfortunately, their substance use rates continued to go up. Just say no and scaring the kids didn't work. So the first time I met the mayor of Reykjavik, this was his statement to our group. We decided to quit trying to fix the kids, and we decided to fix society. Inga Dora Sigfús' daughter is professor at Reykjavik University. She's the founding dean and director of Icelandic Center for Social Research and Analysis. And she is really the guiding inspiration for what we now know as Youth in Iceland or Planet Youth. She took concepts that were developed in the United States and all over the world involving this idea of risk and protective factors. And you can find articles on the archives of National Institute of Drug Abuse right now from 2002 that talk about risk and protective factors and how this is what we should be doing. What she did was she was able to implement those ideas on eventually a national scale over a sustained period of time. And with those elements, she was able to make a change in the youth use rates and addiction rates in Iceland. It's a phenomenal story. And I think part of the reason that she was so successful was she was able to find, secure, establish a reliable funding source. So policy is definitely a big part. This is the, you can look on the BBC, you can look on the YouTube and find this 3-minute video. It goes over the main parts of the program.
Lynn, if you could advance one slide, we are not able to hear the video. There we go.
So that's a great video, and you can find it on YouTube. It's 3 minutes. BBC did it, and it goes through the basic principles of Iceland's problem, and it describes how they started with such a high use rate, and then over 10 years they brought it down, and the next 10 years they kept bringing it down or maintained it. And they looked at a lot of different aspects, and we'll go over those. And but if you want to watch that video, it's a good one. The one thing that the Icelandic scientists don't like about the video is that it focuses on something called parent walks. So they encourage parents to go out and walk around in the evenings, and they might encounter some kids, because kids being out alone was a big problem in the 90s. And so it makes the parents look like they're, patrolling. And the Icelandic scientists say, no, that's not what that's about. That's about parents meeting other parents and establishing a foundation to work together to create an environment that's safe for their adolescents to grow up in, so that they have relationships and they can talk to one another, come to agreements on what they're going to all agree on how late the kids are going to be out, or this idea that I know my friend's parents, my child's friend's parents, and that's essential for the program to really work. So one thing that they do, which is critical, is they've developed these surveys, and the surveys look at risk and protective factors. And it's it's a very long survey. There's 70, 80 questions long. And at the end, the scientists say they can predict with pretty high accuracy which kids are at risk and which communities are at risk for high substance use. It also tells you what in a community, what in a school is a risk factor, and what things are protective factors. So what things are they doing well, and where are they not doing things well? So it looks at substance use, parental factors, support, monitoring, caring, warmth. The peer group effect, is it helpful or is it harmful? Leisure sports activities, it gives information about how much they're doing, the quality of the sports, and some information on bullying, mental and physical health, depression, boredom, that kind of thing. So the surveys go back to Iceland, back to Reykjavik, to the university. They get scrubbed, and then they come up with some ideas. And the coordination between the scientists, the parents, and the practitioners is very important. So they all get together and they look at these surveys, and they try to decide, okay, this year let's work on time spent with parents. Let's work on trying to increase the time with parents, or let's increase the quality of our extracurricular activities, or we have an extracurricular activity that's a risk factor. How can we address that? So all three groups work together to make priority list of what they'd like to work on. It has to originate from the locale, though, from the high school, actually. The surveys come back within a month to 6 weeks, or 2 months, I guess. And that turnaround time is very important. In the United States, sometimes we can have a year, 2 years before we get the results of our surveys. And the surveys coming back quickly is a motivating factor. So we talked about alarm and how alarm and urgency is important to start a program like Iceland, which is a big undertaking. The surveys create alarm and urgency when things are going amiss, and that it comes back right away. The parents can't say, oh, you know what, that was last year's class, they were really rowdy, that's not my kid. Or the administrators won't say, oh yeah, you're right, that was a problem last year, but we fixed that. It increases accountability, and it lets you know in a real way where the problems are and where they're not. So it gives you can base what you do on data. So it'll tell you, for example, are the peer group effects helpful or not helpful, but then more, how do we as parents approach the peer group? So how do we, make rules among ourselves to make sure that whatever the curfew is we agree on, we can coordinate. So this is Ingadora Sigfusdottir, and this is her quote: analysis of these surveys shows that affiliation with family, peer group effects, and types of recreational activities available are the strongest predictors of the paths taken by adolescents. What we know is that of all the risk and protective factors, time spent with parents is the most powerful protective factor. And we also know that that's true across cultures and across societies. So in Spain and West Virginia and Iceland, time spent with parents is a powerful protective factor. Extracurricular activities you'd think would be a strong protective factors. It is under certain circumstances, but under other circumstances, it can be a risk factor. So for example, in some schools, you might have a football team where there's a drug dealer on the team, or maybe the coach there's not good role modeling. So on the other hand, the surveys let you know. So parents will be able to vote with their feet, or address a problem within a team. So this is sort of a summary slide, and it reminds us that it's a local community process, that we use research as a basis to decide what actions you take. They strengthen these parent organizations like the PTO. They also have an organization called Together. They quickly realized that time spent with parents was the most protective factor. And it's also very cheap. So they realized they needed messaging. People didn't realize that was true. And there was this sort of mythology that in the teenage years, Iceland was safe. And so it's really healthy for kids to go out and explore on their own. They didn't realize what the risks were. And then extracurricular activities need to be quality controlled, and then support, the kids that are at risk. So what we saw, or what they saw in Iceland, was really a cultural shift. They really changed the environment. It's a little bit like an infrastructure change. And so, for example, if you look at building the roads and making sure roads and bridges and travel and commerce is protected, it really takes a sustained effort, a sustained investment year after year after year. And that's the same thing that Icelandic scientists say about this cultural shift. So some of the things that have changed over the last 20 years, you remember the slide that showed the substance use going down. These things also changed. Parents and children spend more time together. It doubled. Increased participation in organized sports went from 25% of the kids to 50%. The rates at which students were outside after 10, 3 times a week went from 50% of kids, pretty almost normal, to 25%. And my parents know where I am in the evening went from 50 to 80%. So these are really cultural changes. It's a big movement, and it's a big ask. So one of the stories they tell is back in the 90s, it might have been perfectly acceptable and normal for a dad to give his son 2 beers on a Saturday night and say, have fun and be safe. It was typical for kids to go out and get drunk before a school dance. These things are unheard of now. So it's the norm to not use drugs. So that makes it so it's not, you're not asking your kid to be a hero. You're making it easy so they can float down the river and do it, make those choices without having to rely on the prefrontal cortex that's not yet developed. So what evidence do we have that it's this program that they're using actually works? And one of the studies that they published in 2010 was it compared the communities in Iceland which implemented youth in Iceland to those that didn't. And it of the 2 groups, the risk and protective factors, the outcome substance use, showed greater improvement in the test communities than in the control communities. And the result of that was that the communities that had not opted in, they wanted that. So eventually that's how it grew. It didn't get forced down on the different towns. The towns recognized that this was a good thing. They wanted it. They bought in. The other result that we know happened was the need for drug treatment was decreased in half for men 18 to 21 who grew up during this prevention method while it was implemented. I think that's a huge statement. If you think about the amount of money and pain and suffering, family, society, that the other half of those men who didn't develop a substance use disorder that needed treatment were able to experience. This is a very powerful slide, a result. What else? Iceland has 6 drug overdose deaths per 100,000. We know that these drugs aren't siloed, they go together. US has 21 and Vermont has even more than that. And Iceland has one of the lowest alcohol use rates in Europe, and that's significant because it made such a movement from where they started. We know that the cost to healthcare, it's $800 billion dollars per year in the United States. Back in 2013, over 200 billion of that is, with healthcare costs alone. So we also know that prevention historically costs about $1 for every $10 spent in the cost and injury associated with substance misuse. And so they're saving an enormous amount of money. So Iceland has proven that it's possible to reverse an epidemic of addiction by conducting these health research about the community, communicating discoveries to the community, and encouraging community involvement in solutions and supporting the solutions. I think it's important to think about this, the change in the environment that they're going for. So it's pretty typical for people all over the world when they bring their child home from the hospital, they cover up the light switches and they lock away the poison. They don't expect their 2-year-old not to perhaps try to put their finger in the light switch or get under a cupboard where they shouldn't be. When they're 5 or 6 and they're learning to ride a bicycle, you put the training wheels on the bicycle. So in the teenage years, the prefrontal cortex is undergoing an enormous amount of change and remodeling. It's really under construction. And during that process, teens have much higher morbidity and mortality rates than they did even as 10-year-olds because they're undergoing such changes. And so it's normal. We protect our kids at other stages in their development. It's expected. And so it seems logical that we would want to do what we need to do the same thing for teens given their developmental stage, neurologically, I guess sociologically. And it doesn't expect, it's a big lift in that it's a big undertaking, but it's also a big relief for parents and for kids. They're not expected, like I said, the kid isn't expected to be a hero, and the parents have the support of other parents and the community and these scientists and their policymakers to support what they're doing. So it takes the pressure off of the parents as well. I know a lot of parents who have, kids with substance use disorder, and they inevitably shouldn't, but sometimes ask, what could I have done differently? And, Iceland, I think, would say, what could we do differently together? And it's really not about me, and it's not about you. It's about us. It's about us working together to make an environment that's supportive of our teens. So in addition to decreased drug use, predictably, they also saw a decrease in sexual violence against women, decrease in bullying, especially theft went down, crime, injury, and drug-related traffic deaths. And they saw increases in popular and classical music expression, bonding and cooperation between parents and neighborhoods, and engagement in arts and participation in sports. So Iceland has truly shown the world in practice, and not just in theory, that crippling substance use disorder is preventable, and prevention saves money for the community by decreasing crime and healthcare costs, as well as lost educational goals, and that prevention promotes healthy, connected communities while saving money. So as you can imagine, Iceland, with all the success, other communities, countries, municipalities in Europe took notice, and many of them want to adopt the Icelandic Planet Youth program. And all of these flags that you see are places where there's a country or there's a municipality that's adopted youth in Iceland in their community. So soon they'll have data on how transmutable and translatable that is into other communities and cultures and societies. So I learned about Iceland when I went to a Termath conference in Iceland in 2017. I went back with my friend Heidi Heilman the next year, and we had a long afternoon interview with Ingadora Sigfúsdóttir, and that resulted in an invitation to the very first International Icelandic Prevention Conference in 2018. And when I got there, I was the only American. So there was a room full of 100 Europeans, and then a few doctors from Chile. And at the end, I was so excited, realizing what a big problem Vermont has. I came back, and that week I was at a function with the Commissioner of Health, and I couldn't stop talking to him about Iceland and how all the different parts of the program. It's a 3-day conference, jam-packed with information, and then I presented a lot at the opioid coordination committee, Prevention Council, treatment, interdisciplinary treatment groups, schools, churches, the Rotary Club, a lot of different presentations. And at the end of it, I attracted the attention of Holly Morehouse, who's on her computer there in that room, in that picture. And she is now Ingadora Sigfúsdóttir of Vermont. So she really is leading youth in Iceland in Vermont right now. And we together invited Umberto Soriano, who is the president of the Pediatric Society in Chile, to Vermont to be our youth in Iceland ambassador, and he presented grand rounds. And we did that because he successfully sold the entire country of Chile on this Planet Youth program, which is quite remarkable, actually. So there he is giving grand rounds with Dr. Ritu, and we met with the governor, presented all over, interviews and whatnot. And in the end, these 5 communities implemented Vermont youth projects using the Planet Youth model. So that's pretty exciting. And the first surveys were taken in the fall of 2019. And we are really hoping that we're going to see a diagram like this. But of course, we have to cope with the headwinds of commercialization in Vermont and a profound, incredible lack of alarm, unfortunately. So that's sort of an open question as to how that's going to work out, but we're hopeful. We're hopeful that things will improve. We did get some results back from the very first one, which were quite sobering. past ever use of cannabis in Vermont communities is often 40%, which is really high. Iceland, you can see there, they were concerned at 17%. And one community I know of, it was, 50% of the graduating 12th graders had used marijuana. And there's a brand new study out of the University of Vermont looking at European teens, pretty powerful study, doing MRI, imaging of their brain. And as they use marijuana, it's showing the changes in the prefrontal cortex. And one of the really troubling things about that study is that just with 1 or 2 smokes of marijuana, they demonstrated thinning of the prefrontal cortex, premature thinning, so an abnormality. And there were some behavioral issues that went along with that they also tested and found. So we're in a troubling situation in Vermont. We're really hopeful that this program will help. Here's some thoughts from a Vermont prevention professional. We fund schools with the expectation that children are entitled to a certain level of education in Vermont and in the United States. Schools are not dependent on a competitive grant process funding, but prevention is. And what that means is that the people who should be doing prevention in the schools, like taking a teacher out of the classroom, they're in the corner writing grants. And so this takes up a huge amount of their time. And then if the grant isn't funded, it leaves them, the result is that there are prevention deserts when these don't get funded again. And what was once a great funded prevention program is currently nothing. And we have that situation in Vermont and the United States. Often they're in underprivileged areas, but not always. And so one thing that when we came back from Iceland the first time, the health department said, oh gosh, we know all that. It's all on the NIDA website. We've been doing that for years. And we're kind of looking at them going, well, the results aren't working. What happened? But they pulled out statistics from, a community in Vermont. And it was wonderful. This person was very talented at writing grants. They were well connected with the mayor. They were a highly educated and talented prevention professional, wrote all her own surveys, did root cause analysis, was able to, lead and get people on board, talking to parents and teachers and whatnot. And her graph looked exactly like Iceland. It was a community of 20,000 with an exceptionally talented prevention professional. And so what we're hoping is that working with Iceland and with Iceland's method, we'll be able to have those kinds of results when people don't have all of those talents in one person, which is quite unusual. So this is nearing the end. The Iceland experience teaches prevention is possible, but sustained effort and funding are important for success. And we can buy ambulances to pick up the bodies and bones at the bottom of the cliff, or we can build safety rail to prevent folks from going over. And that reminds me of, in the United States, we're really a treatment-oriented medical system. And we're also incentivized for treatment. And so it tends to be that when we identify a heart attack or a kid who's using, then we intervene and send him to the therapist and do all these interventions. And that's a very expensive way to do medicine, frankly. And it also, the person who's had open heart surgery is on, a fistful of meds. They might have been better off if we had interventions upstream, preventing substance misuse or preventing that illness earlier. Now, if you're overwhelmed, I think this is a super inspiring slide. It's from Dr. Christensen, who's done a lot of this work. And it shows that in Latvia, which was not a country that invested at all in more coaches or soccer fields or trainings, all they did was contract to have the surveys done, the 80 question surveys, and then a quick turnaround time for accountability and urgency. They presented that to the administration and to the parents and the community. Just that was able to affect substantial, significant decreases in substance use. So I think that's inspiring for what might be possible, even if this whole program is a little bit overwhelming to think about. And this is why we care. Vermont is a beautiful state, and it encourages you to look up and see what's possible, even if you have to go to Iceland to find out. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. Let me come back on here and take your slides down so I can see you. This is so inspiring. And, you know, can you repeat again, what did they do on a small scale to initiate change just in Latvia? You know, if someone listening to this says, gosh, how do I do that in Highlands Ranch, Colorado?
Absolutely. What you
just
do is you get on the phone. What you do is you get on the phone and you call Inga Dorisik, daughter, or one of her very talented researchers. You try to get in contact with the researchers and scientists in Iceland and ask them, what can we do to, you know, could you come, how can we set it up so that you could come and do a survey of our community? And they're amazingly, they're really grounded in research. They've had a lot of attention. You know, you would think that, gosh, they're out selling this program to everybody, but they're really researchers. They're very grounded in the university, and their heart, they really care about the kids. And so what they'll probably say is yes, but we want you to sign a 5-year contract.
Right.
So this is
conceptually, you know, are there a few things that we can do to mimic the Iceland experience without getting Iceland involved? Without, you know, what are a few things that parents just on our own, just right here in my neighborhood, that I could do that would be helpful, that you can advise parents? Would it be getting a coalition together of 20 of our neighbors? Would it be reaching out to the friends, your children's friends' parents, and coming up with some of these agreements? What are some just grassroots things that we can do that have proven to be successful?
The important thing, Laura, is to base what you do on science. So what the surveys do is they tell you on a granular level what's going on in your community. What is a risk factor? What is a protective factor? So maybe none of the parents are spending time with their kids. You don't know that ahead of time. Okay, maybe this team is a risky situation. That's why you need the surveys. So you need the science in order to direct what you do. There have been so many instances where people grab a program off the shelf, something that's worked in, you know, at Columbia with 2 different groups. You do this. It's not. This is detailed. This is tailor fit for your community. And the reason it works is because it's tailor fit for your community today, and then they redo the survey a year or 2 later so that it's tailor fit next year too, and then in the next year too.
Okay, and so everybody's asking about that. Can we have their survey questions? Is that only something that they can do? Do you have to hire them? You know,
it's not a it's an expense, but it's not a big expense. It's not a big expense. It's completely you know, compared to what communities are spending on the consequences of drug misuse in their communities. It's not a big expense.
Sure.
And it's well worth.
Is the
I think
the drug researcher or the drug prevention specialist that you mentioned in Vermont, she was gifted in writing her own questions. Is that something that someone with that expertise could do as well? I just wonder if there's someone that's over here doing something similar.
You could do that. I mean, the thing about Iceland is that they've spent 20 years creating a database to scrub against, and that database and that tool is kind of important. I don't, you know, I think that's one of the problems, is that in the United States we say we discovered this, you know, or many of our researchers contributed to this idea of risk and protective factors, so we should be able to do it. But that's where the problem is. It's not in the theory, it's in the implementation.
Sure.
And
okay, so someone's asking, what kind of expense is that? And Is there a way to connect to the Icelandic researchers? Would you be able to share their contact information, and I can include that?
Oh, of course. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So we'll put that
I
in the
think-
follow-up email and also on this page, everyone, if you're watching the video.
Yeah, it's in my opinion, it's a completely manageable expense for a community to take on. I mean,
Okay.
people spend, how much do they spend on a new soccer field or a new football field?
Okay. One question, I'm curious if Iceland's methods and approach could work because our society is diverse with people from all different backgrounds and speaking different languages.
I've heard that question before, and what I've heard them say is that they've, you saw the flags all over Spain and Romania, and there's a pod in West Virginia, I think. So they have that data, and I think the answer is it is translatable. And it's translatable because it's tailored to each community.
Okay.
So the surveys give you detailed, information about what's going on in your community. What are your strengths and what are the weaknesses? What are some things that you could do better? And
Okay.
it's been translated into many languages. I know that too.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Oh, it's already, yeah.
Okay, so another question. Iceland proved that they could reverse their epidemic. Have they been able to maintain that in this current environment worldwide that seems to promote and support marijuana legalization? Are they reporting more current rates of their youth use?
Really good question. And the last time I heard Andora Siku's daughter speak on this, she was talking about vaping. She said, vaping has come, we're dealing with that. And also she mentioned this idea that kids are online. They're exposed to everything on the internet. And they've added questions about vaping. They had a spike in vaping. What I heard them say, I haven't seen the data, is that they're getting, they've already started to see better results on that, but they have the same pressures. But the answer to have they been able to keep it low is yes. So I don't know if you remember the slide, but it came down in the first 10 years, and then it's like they can't get it below 5%.
Sure. Which one would expect. You're always going to have the outliers in any set of data. Okay.
But they also say, when we don't pay attention, our numbers go up. So you have to keep filling in the potholes.
Thank you for highlighting the Iceland model. Knowing that our US population is quite different, how can we start implementing the concepts here?
I think the thing to do is to start with the survey, start with the science, and see where your community is, see where your strengths are. You may have immigrant communities that have a lot of strengths. You maybe have very tight-knit immigrant communities, and that may be a strength in terms of home life or focus on the I don't know. But I would say you want to start really base it on science.
Okay. I am a parent without the ability to provide this funding. How can I make a difference by myself?
You can't. But I mean, in my opinion, the good and the bad about Iceland is that it's not a mom whose kid gets into substance abuse, substance misuse problems. It's not about them, right? It's really about the community. And so it takes the pressure off. It truly does. It does show them that it's not all in the genes. I mean, that idea that you're predestined, a certain number are going to be, that's been, we can put that to bed. And that's really helpful in a way. It gives hope. We can do something. I would say the first thing to do is to gather, coalition building, right? So you want to go and it starts at a really small level. So at your elementary school or at your high school with 100 kids or 1,000 kids, can you get enough of a leadership group of parents who can say, look, you know, this is a big deal. We care about this. We want to. They can contract and they can affect a change on their community level for sure. That's where I would start.
Okay. Let's see. What is Iceland's model of treatment for kids who are already addicted to cannabis?
We didn't go and look at treatment facilities when I was there. I did go to the Minister of Health and spent an afternoon there, and we looked at their data. We were trying to figure out, I was interested in the question of if Iceland's ever cannabis use went from 17% down to 5%. What happened to their mental illness? You know, did their psychosis rates go down or something else? And so I did see that, and when I was there, I did see the Minister of Health does things with parents. So parents might get together and go around to shops, and someone's breaking the law in terms of signage or whatever, and they write in, and so the parents are kind of activists that way in terms of they're educated about advertising and whatnot. But I didn't look at treatment, and they're not focused on treatment. They're focused on prevention. They're really focused on this idea that a kid shouldn't have to be a hero. The peer groups should just bring them along. It should be normal not to use drugs. Kids don't want to use drugs. They just want to be like everybody else. And if the peer group isn't using, then that's what they're going for, really.
Okay, awesome. How do we create that sense of alarm and urgency that you described?
I think that's important. I think that's really important. When I was preparing for this talk, I first started going through and I thought, oh, well, I'll tell them how Iceland works. And then I realized, you know what? Iceland had a sense of alarm.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Have that.
And we have 40 to 50% where they had 17% marijuana use. And so it really got me thinking that really the first step, what we need to do right now is start working on creating that sense of alarm. And I think, what you're doing, bringing attention to this, letting more people know, this is important. I think and I do think this is the very first step of Iceland, is really letting people know, wow, this is a big problem. And you're up against industry for that, because they're minimizing that, of course.
Yes, and they have a lot of dollars behind it. How are parents financially supported in Iceland? It is expensive to take your child to cultural and sports activities.
So that's really good. A good question. In Iceland, there are a lot of people who are divorced. They have a very high divorce rate. Wow. In addition, they have a pretty high, antidepressant rate. They're not immune, mental illness. And moms work, like the majority of the moms work outside the home. So this isn't some special place that's, mom's home and all the parents are married and whatnot, a nuclear family. But what they do have is kids go to school and then they choose what they want to do in the afternoon, like from 3 to 6 or whatever, and they get moved from place to place. So the after school is part of the school. I mean, it's part of the community's offering, I guess you would say. So that as a mom, you might go to work all day and come home at 5. You and your child come home at 5, and he's been or she's been at school and she's been at her after school. They take that out off your plate. You don't have to run off and take your kid or figure out carpooling after school. It's really a big piece. The other thing that they do, which is really interesting, is municipalities offer after-school programs and different kind of programs, arts and stuff like that. And so the kids choose, and each child gets about $500, but it's really funny money. So you get online and you sign up for, pottery or soccer, and you apply that. Then you have to add some of your own money. It doesn't cover everything, but maybe 90%. And what that does is it keeps so the municipality hires, soccer coaches, and the soccer coaches are, master's level, they're vetted, they're not, one problem is having people who are running after school who've been teaching all day and are exhausted, or it's a dad who you don't really know. It's a profession. It's like people who run the after school programs are well trained and well educated, and they can pay them because everybody gets $500 that they then take back again.
So that really has to have a lot of support, school support, district support. I mean, our district can't even keep their activity bus running. There's no money for funding. So I know they wouldn't be able to support that. So it really would take a multi-year approach of having funding and having things reallocated and giving extra money to the kids. It's a big cultural shift for a lot of our school districts with the way that they're structured right now.
Right. I mean, we are having a huge infrastructure infusion, I guess. And if someone thought it were a priority and said, look, do this in two communities and see what happens, or I mean, if it were to happen everywhere, so if somebody were to understand this is a way, like this is alarming where we are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, that study that came out of the University of Vermont, looking at those European kids who tried pot once before the age of 19, had thinning of their prefrontal cortex prematurely, right? And then they had behavioral issues that went along with that. This is a really big deal that we are exposing our kids to, in my opinion. Yeah. But I mean, opiate use, the whole thing. But we have to realize the cost of that and then realize that there's a solution. And I think both things are part of it, right? There is a solution. That's a huge piece. That's a big statement. Hey, there is a way out. And hey, we need to do it because this is really expensive, what we're doing right now.
Well, we will definitely look forward to seeing the results of the communities that are doing this in Vermont and seeing how on a small scale, what impacts can be made. And certainly if they have great results and are able to share that out in a way that gets the attention of a lot of other groups, that, could be something that they can show is possible and that it can be impacted. Someone else is also saying it would be interesting to find out if in 20 more years of this model, you would expect depression and divorce rates to go down.
Absolutely. And I think if you had Dr. Smith on, talking too, he would talk about it's completely expected that all these other things change too. Violence against
hand in hand.
Delinquency, these all go together. They sort of they knew from the data from 2000 that this was going to happen, and it did. And in fact, the Icelandic scientists say, look, we're measuring, alcohol, tobacco, smoking, but there are all these other things that we know are improving.
Yeah. Well, every other comment is thank you. Appreciate your time. Great presentation. And I will just echo that and tell you we're so thankful, Catherine, that you could be here with us and share all of your experience and your time and your amazing talent for prevention. So we appreciate you so much and thank you for being one of Johnny's ambassadors.
Thank you, Laura. This is just wonderful what you're doing, and congratulations on your award. So well deserved.
Thank you. That was a surprise. Yes, for those who don't know, and why would you? I received the Moxie Award from the Drug Free America Foundation. So that was quite an honor and very surprising. I was definitely not expecting it. I was just there to give a talk. So that was really fun to receive afterward with my fellow recipients, Corinne Gasper and Aubrey. So that was it was just a real honor. Thank you for acknowledging that, Catherine. Appreciate it and appreciate you. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time here on Johnny's Ambassadors. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.